The two dates that we have, the two dates that we have available are June 26th or July 10th. Which would you prefer? They're both Saturdays.
Let me just check my calendar 1 second.
Okay.
June 26th, you said? Or
yeah, or July 10th.
10th. Yeah, either of those will work for me.
Okay, why don't we go with the 26th then?
Okay, let's see, July 10th. Yeah. What time are you thinking?
Probably 10 a.m., like a 10 to 12 or 11 to 1. What's better?
Yeah, that works. Probably earlier is better because it gets warm, you know.
So let's do it 10 a.m. And then Mike and I will probably start talking to you next week about particulars, but we want it to be really around farm animals and animal husbandry, and how do you integrate that into your farm?
Okay. Let's see, farm animals. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot less animals than we used to have, but we still have our potbelly pigs and our goats and our chickens and our meat rabbits.
Yeah, I think that's better anyway. You know, we're talking about more small animals like that. Not talking about cattle. So you know, the goats and potbellies and the chickens, rabbits. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, that works. Cool.
Oh, good.
Sorry, just finishing up dinner. And I'll put my
no problem.
video
Take your
on.
time.
Okay.
It's messy.
Sydney, what's up?
Hi, Pastor Mike.
How you doing?
Doing well. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Hey, Pastor and Deacon.
Hey.
Hey. Hi, Kristen.
I'm glad you made it, Chris. Scott, you all right? You muted, bro.
Yeah, it's good. It's been a long day, a lot of Zoom today.
All right. Well, we'll try to give you something to keep your mind off of everything else. How's everybody doing tonight?
Well,
doing good.
A lot of Zoom today.
Right.
Good. I know. It's a Zoom where I told people when this whole thing started, and folks were like, well, at least you get a break. I'm like, man, I'm working, you know, harder on this computer and this iPad than I'm doing when I have to go into the office. So it's like, you know what? It's great that we can connect with people in places and ways that we don't normally do on a regular basis. But, you know, I mean, you know, the whole thing about not working hard. So trust me. And I really, you know, feel for those of you that have kids that are students and are trying to navigate their way through school, even if some of them go back. So we want to continue to make sure that while we support each other, we also support and lift up young people that are trying to make their way through it as well. So tonight, we are excited for those of you that are part of the AFFP cohort 1, phase 2. We've also invited our class from AFFP cohort 3, phase 1, and we are going to be talking about crop planting tonight. And what is important is understanding that, you know, crop planting for some people who just want to get out and do basic urban gardening or certain parts of farming. Some people say it's overkill, it's not necessary, but for people that are doing it for a living or a livelihood, and even those of you that are really trying to do programs, there is value in it, whether you're dealing with an urban space, whether you're dealing with an urban space, or you are actually on a full-fledged farm. It's really important to really talk about crop plans and what crop plans are. Some folks say they have major limitations, but I really want to be able to hear from you all. But before we jump in, when I say and use that term crop plans or crop planning, what immediately comes to your mind?
Rotational, like rotating crops.
Crop rotation can be a part of a crop planning, but crop planning is actually another task in and of itself, and it really has more so to do with farm and garden design and drawing out a plan for harvest, production, yield, and sustainability. Anybody else? Crop planning, what does it make you think of?
Exactly what you're going to plant.
Okay, absolutely. Absolutely.
How much
And
of the crop you're going to plant? Sorry.
How much of the crop you're going to plant? Absolutely. Somebody else was going to say something?
That was me. I was thinking of definitely what goes with what. So when you crop planting, you gotta make sure you're planting the right together.
Absolutely. And in this agroecological space that we're in, we don't often talk about this, but this is real. If you are farming to market and farming to survive, you have to think about, right, what your community that you are feeding, what is culturally relevant and appropriate, what grows where you are, what the demand is. And if you are going to farmers markets, grocery stores, or whatever, you do have to be in tune with what is going to sell in the market. Because crop planning, also includes an investment. Come on, talk back to me. You got, it does take an investment. It does take an investment. And so
yes, it does.
Right. So if your goal is to feed your family or feed your community, if whatever it is, I often talk about the things that we do at Food, Faith, and Justice in terms of programs, because we're more program driven as opposed to market driven. But what I always say to the team and the staff is, plus or minus a little bit, the one thing that we can't do is lose money, right? And when I say lose money, I say lose money, maybe it's one thing, $500, $1,000, but if you're going into the hole every season, $5,000 and $7,000, that's a problem. And on a bigger scale farm, it could be an even bigger problem. What do y'all think about that?
I mean, last I heard, nobody really likes to lose money. So
okay. You got the food. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think about crop planning. I think about succession, what's coming next, and what seeds that I should start so that I'm not wasting any of the season. I live in Portland, so our growing season isn't as long.
Okay.
So trying to just use up all of that time so that I don't waste money.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
I wasn't sure if I heard her say anything about succession planting. Did you? Okay. It was kind of choppy for a moment, but yeah, that was what I thought of most importantly when you plant And if you go in the market, that you continually have what is in demand.
Okay.
By planning it out.
Right.
Yeah.
And succession planning is indeed an important part of that, right? Because when you start talking about continuous harvest, go ahead.
Sorry, Pastor Mike, it's Raquel. I was also thinking kind of to piggyback on succession planting, you got to think about water usage.
And water use, that's
that
right.
whole, like, how much does that actually take out of your potential kitty? Because I think that a lot of times we just don't even think about what that does at the end of every month. And then potentially, like, if you're in the ag area, I don't know what the water rates are, but again, like per, you know, how many gallons you use, acreage and stuff, and the more that you use, you know, you run into these fine lines of worrying about if there's a drought, if there's like a hot spell, if there, you know, again, you have to monitor the practices of how you're going to be able to keep the production of what you did healthy enough to be able to get to market. And that a lot of times that water can be a big part of that.
So Raquel, here's the important thing, because I think you're right. So if you're in California, you mentioned drought. If you're in California, that's a problem. And if you happen just to be in Sonoma County in particular, that's a real problem right about now. So one of the things we have to talk about is water usage. And again, you know, when we talk about agroecology, we talk about sustainability. You know, I was watching one news program last week, and they were talking to a couple of farmers in Sonoma County. One was had a vineyard, and the other had other crops, and they were both saying the problem that they're experiencing in the moment, you know, is they could lose entire harvests. And you know, what does that mean for not just sustainability and viability, but for many of them, you know, it's about just their survival. So I think that gives us kind of a square in where we're going to go. This presentation is not exhaustive, but it's some things that we want to put on your mind, and then just a couple of things about thinking about crop plans and the development of those tools. And I say this because I know some of you, I know like Raquel and Misty and a couple of you others that really are fully engaged in farming and homesteading already, you know, and others are thinking about smaller operations. I think you need to think about it to scale, and we'll kind of talk about that because we understand that everything is not going to be the same across the board. So I've tried to make it as general as we can. Mike, if you're ready, you can go ahead and share the screen. So we're talking about crop planning for continuous harvest. And what does that mean? What does that look like to each of us? Go ahead, Mike. So, you know, what is a crop plan? You know, we talked about crop plans often being overlooked as an important part of farming. Something we need to do often before the season starts to help growers calculate how much to grow, when they want to grow, seeds starting in greenhouses each week, you know, where the crops are going to be transplanted, building a harvest plan on a weekly basis throughout the growing season, right? If you guys look at that, jive with what you think, what you've heard, what you know. Y'all there?
Hi. So I hope you guys can see me. Let me just Anyway, I try to do crop planting and it's really hard for me. I think we have a water issue, like she was mentioning, and then, oh, sorry. Looks like the camera's really bad.
Yeah, Missy, I'm having some problems too. Mike,
Okay.
I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna sign off and jump back on, y'all, just because my camera's in and out. Give me 2 minutes. Hold on, man. Hold on. Hold on. Let me get on.
Oh, Apple been having tripping for a week now, bro.
This ain't Apple. This is Zoom.
Zoom.
I was just watching a YouTube video on alley cropping, and just by happenstance, and this guy he was down, I think, near the Florida Everglades, and what he was doing, he was actually doing two things. He was selling trees, and he was slowly moving into permanent cropping, but he used alley cropping to go to market for the first couple of years until he got on his feet. So, and he would put him in between the trees, and then as his trees started becoming fuller and fuller, he would just reduce the amount of alley cropping. And the way he did it, he saved a lot of money because he was growing plants that were indigenous to the area, so they were more resistant, didn't need as much water, and they were, but still he would grow stuff like asparagus and cabbage and stuff like that, just to take to the market until he got his trees, growing full. Hold on just a second.
Michael, I think that's amazing because a lot of times we just forget that there were, multitudes of times when, people didn't have a lot of the technology that we have. And like in the Yucatan Peninsula, there are no rivers, but there are cenotes of where they get their water.
Mm-hmm.
And so same, a lot of the indigenous people there have to utilize the groundwater and, get their fresh water from other sources to be able to, survive. But I was thinking in the same way that when you mentioned that, I saw a program where they were talking about a group of people who are growing seaweed for food, but also for fertilizer and for like a bunch of other type of products that they can do because it has like a celluloid base and it can be used in plastics and other things. Has a lot of calcium, vitamin B12. I mean, like it was pretty cool how up in Alaska, they're using that as a crop out in the ocean.
Right. I saw one where they were doing the seaweed and they were harvesting oysters at the same time. It was really interesting.
Mike, hit the next slide. So when we contemplate crop plans, right, they can be from basic to complex. And as every grower knows, they're often tweaked and revised as the season progresses from season to season. We'll get more into that as we go. Having a plan at the outset, however, it can reduce the stress. And it's interesting as I listen to Raquel and earlier Misty talking about even in trying to do crop plans, how it's tough. And yeah, it is tough. And you don't even need to have a whole homestead or a whole farm. Just in a garden, it can be a challenge. Anybody else experience some of those challenges with trying to make a plan? Have you ever tried it? Did it work? Did it not work? Let me hear you.
I've created a crop plan specifically to sell as seedlings. So it wasn't like a full crop plan in that you're planning out when to transplant into the ground. But so it's more so the order of when should I propagate like tomatoes, when should I propagate eggplants? There needs to be an order and they should all germinate at a certain amount of time because certain things like warmth and other things don't. So planning everything in advance prior to sowing the seeds was incredibly helpful, but there's always something that goes wrong, like, oh, a pest takes a liking to this particular plant that was placed somewhere, and then having to think about, or like something just didn't germinate. There's things just out of your control, and then
right.
At least planning in advance gives you enough like head capacity to think about these other problems that you'll eventually have to solve along the way.
Yeah, and that's real. I mean, that's really kind of the essence of of tonight's presentation. That's really good. Let's go on, Mike. Next slide. Why do you need a crop plan, right? For those of you that are doing it for profit, it's almost essential, but I would suggest even for those of you that are doing nonprofit farming or gardening or even backyard homesteading, I do think there's some important steps in a crop plan that can be helpful. Because it is about knowing what to grow, knowing how much to grow, and knowing when to grow it, right? Those are things that we should all like aspire or want to know as we build farming, either as a program, a business, or even a hobby. I think that the more knowledge that we acquire and the more experience that we gain, part of our goal should always be to get better or more efficient, at least, at what we do. Next slide. Good crop planting tools help farmers choose varieties, quantities, and succession dates. That's just what you're talking about for all crops, right? Adapt their own planting plans, calendars, seed orders, and variety selections. Should be able to conduct basic calculations to determine the number of seeds needed using addition and simple division. So there is, some science and math behind it, but we'll get into some of the challenges and problems and drawbacks. Next slide. So you were just talking about seed order, and that is really important because not every seed, depending on the season, matures at the same time. You need to think about it, in terms of seed starting dates, seed ordering, transplanting, what happens at what date, and how do you build a harvest plan around seed order and what that looks like. Bed preparation schedule, greenhouse seeding sheets are really important. Mike, you might want to talk about just some of your experience with seed starting and some of the pros and cons that you experienced even just last year.
Yeah, for one, it was a great experience to grow the plants from the seed. And actually, what I did was set up a little greenhouse inside the building. I was using the LED lights on the shelves, and even though that a lot of plants they started well, I noticed the ones that I put in the window were growing even faster. So nothing beats sunlight. When the LED lights don't even compare. They were growing twice as fast in the sunlight. I think the biggest problem that I had with growing things for seeds is that I couldn't, trying to do it on my own, I couldn't keep up with actually getting seeds into the ground, and not knowing, being my first time, I didn't really know when to plant the seedlings, because some of them I tried to plant too early and they didn't last too long in the garden, but others like really took off. But now I know, like, the roots have to be netted in, or you have to use the seed starters that deteriorate over time naturally. They're kind of like cardboard or something. You put the seeds in those are real easy. You just plant the whole thing in the ground. The plant doesn't go into shock from the new soil. It takes its time growing through. And I think the outer part just becomes part of the nutrients that the plant uses. And so, but yeah, I would definitely, if you want to, especially if you're doing stuff with kids, to watch those seeds grow, to watch them sprout up from what seems like nothing is very exciting.
And also, you were talking a little bit, Mike, and I love for other people to jump in this. You start talking about direct seeding and transplanting schedules. Michael touched on that. The challenges in scheduling around direct seeding and transplanting. Anybody else have some experience, good or bad, when trying to build a plan around transplanting schedules and seeding?
I started my tomatoes when the almanac told me to, but the freezing temperature in my city extended way past when I should have, or when I planned to put them in the ground. So my tomatoes were flowering like in my living room.
Wow.
And it just felt quite stressful.
Yeah, that's really tough. I know, even if you start seeds, or you get some starts from somewhere, to really seeing early blossoms on things like peppers and tomatoes can be really frustrating. But that doesn't mean that they can't be saved. You can always clip, pinch, I should say, those blossoms. And if the root system is helping, they don't get the transplant shock like Michael's saying, there's still hope for them. But that can be a real problem. What about a harvest record sheet and a detailed map of your garden or your farm? Do people keep harvest record sheets? Have you tried that as part of your crop plan?
I've tried doing it, but right now the way that we have it, I have a guy that helps me, a permaculture guy, and so we have like beds that are specifically for brassicas or beds that are specifically for tomatoes. And so the idea is that if we have the right soil and the right microorganisms and everything, that it'll be fine and we don't have to rotate. That's his theory. But and it's worked out so far. But the problem that I have is we've now done this for a couple years, and it's like every year the water, like we have a water issue, like there's too much salt in my water because we've been using recycled water mixed with the tap water. Apparently, by the way, recycled water has 5 times the amount of salt that so if you are putting that on your plants as a sole thing, just know that it has 5 times the amount of salt as regular water or tap water. And then the other thing is we have a serious pincher bug and roly-poly problem. So the second, like if the seeds do come up and I, put them in the ground, transplant them, then it's like immediately they're gobbled up by the pincher bugs and the roly-polies. And so it's like I can't win lately. So sometimes I'm always like survival of the fittest, sometimes the plants survive and sometimes they don't. Luckily, I'm not selling them for profit, but if I was, I would be so stressed out.
Okay.
We have invested, some money into it. We're looking into getting a reverse osmosis system for our water. It's like
for the plants, you know, and you're going, this is crazy that the plants require this perfect water, you know.
What has
So
been the impact of the salinity on the plants in the water? What have you seen? What have you observed as it comes to harvest?
so I think the impact is that it's killing the microbiology.
Okay.
So it's killing, sorry, just let me shut this door real quick. It's killing the microbiology, which is then leading pests, you know, like the bad bugs are now around. And so it's killing off the good bugs and keeping the bad bugs. And then I've also noticed that like certain crops, for instance, strawberries, they won't grow with the high salt.
Sure.
But like asparagus was fine. Asparagus super tolerant. A lot of the perennials are tolerant.
Okay.
But the annuals cannot handle the salinity. So a lot of them.
Okay.
The tomatoes seem to be doing okay. We did okay with cucumbers. So
Yeah.
again, you just have to like see which ones will take. And I was telling my permaculture guy, like, this is too stressful. We're just going to have to go with whatever plants will grow with the recycled water, because, you know, it becomes an issue of time and then money, you know, with the reverse osmosis. And then that wastes a lot of water, because reverse osmosis can sometimes do a 1 to 4, like give you a gallon and then it wastes 4 gallons just for a gallon of water, you know? And so I'm like,
sure.
And my husband picks up every single day he goes to the wastewater treatment facility and picks up like 330 gallons. We don't even have water because we have a well. It's we don't have a very deep well. So he has to pick up water every day. That's how we even have water for our crops, but it's doable. So if water's an issue, just know you can get the recycled water and they'll give you a lot. You just have to haul it, and there'll be certain crops that will not tolerate it. But then again, it's an issue with the soil, because then the bad pests are there. So, Anyway, so it's frustrating sometimes, but I'm not pressuring myself. I'm just being patient that eventually, after this is like our 3rd year in this house, so well, with growing crops. So I think eventually I'm just giving myself time. I've watched all those YouTube videos where it's like 7 years, you know, it takes. So I'm going, okay, might take 7 years, but to get the microbiology right.
If I could add a little bit to what Misty just said, because about it's that just this, I work in water resources, so I just wanted the salt also does more than just harm the organism. So it's not that it necessarily always kills one organism or another, but it has like the chemistry of the water, the salt itself actually just causes the plant to dehydrate. It interferes with the way that the nutrients move through the plant. So, and how the plant converts in its resources into sugars. So it's not always about the salt interfering with the microbes. I just wanted to clarify that. And real quick, because I work in water resources, not all recycled water is 5 times saltier. It does depend on the source water of the individual or the entity that's providing the water. Like if so anyways, just out of it's complex when it comes to water. That's what I do know. So anyway.
Melissa, let me ask you this question. So you were talking about how it can change the biology of the plant in terms of the absorption of nutrients. What about, obviously that means it changes the biology of the soil, right? The level of salinity in the soil as well, right?
Yeah, it can do that as well. And sometimes depending on the soil type, the salt like molecules can like stick in the soil, and therefore it makes it harder for water to move through the soil. So that also, so it can interfere with the structure of the soil also, yes. And then it makes the soil less, it makes the water less easier to filter through it. So it can kind of lead to a little bit of clogging at times too, in a very simple way to put it, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Go to the next slide, Mike. So crop planning and goals for emerging farmers is a good entry point, right? For newer emerging farmers with some growing experience, especially, because particularly, we talk about the United States, but we also need to think about international farmers as well. People, even intrastate, right? You may be unfamiliar with crop production, planning, or marketing tools, and new farmers aiming to participate in things like CSAs or market sales can benefit from using crop planning tools. And again, I know that this is far more on the for-profit side, but that is something that we do need to consider in terms of where we are. Next slide. Because what we should be thinking about is how do you add value to your crops, right? We've talked about this a little bit. A couple of you mentioned it earlier. Not all crops are of equal value, depending on where you are. Sustainable crops that need to maximize market value and potential are things, again, if you are building a farm business plan, crop planning is really important. And you do have to consider that, right? And to determine, which crops are most profitable for your particular farm or garden, as well as the diversification of crops and strategies to maximize your farm or farming options. And so again, I don't like to monetize everything, but that is a reality if you are trying to build out a farm or farm-related business. Next slide. You can't see. I don't know if you can increase the size of the grid, Mike, but this is a crop planning spreadsheet, and it has columns, about that really looks at what is planted, when it's planted, harvest times. I mean, part of this is building these tools for success. Keeping good records is important. And I would tell you this, even, for those of you that may not necessarily be, doing a full-fledged farm or market kind of gardening, keeping those records are really important. Don't worry about enlarging, Mike, I can talk it through. Because one of the things that's really important is you should really have some observation tools. If it's nothing more than a chart, some chart paper, a journal of when you're planning, what you're planning, and building some columns that you can kind of examine the patterns that go through. So I think it's really important that you really do that in terms of keep the records that you need to plan for your success. And let me say this too, because I've had this discussion with people before about crop planning. You're gonna have to decide what success looks like for you. For some folks, it may be purely a financial goal. It may be purely a production and yield goal, but you may have other goals. But I think whatever it is, part of your crop plan should be about how you determine success, what it's going to look like for your particular farm. And I'll get another plan out to you that'll be more clear, and we'll put it in Classroom that you can see a better image. Next slide. And that means you need to leverage the power of information technology. Because what a good crop plan should do is help you reformat the crop information, according to the data that you really want to see and what is it that you want to understand. I do think that you can integrate certain technology that aids farmers in modifying and easily updating their crop plans from year to year. I'll get into that in a minute. But I would tell you that I know some folks that are in farming or even the gardening field, and they're like, man, all I really want to do is grow, or all I really want to do is teach people how to grow with kids. I want to just do this, do this. And I don't think that you have to do everything, and every tool may not necessarily work for you, but see it as a tool as opposed to a task. Now, there's some things that you can't avoid, but I think that you can see it as a tool that helps you to improve your knowledge and efficiency. And then that way it becomes a little more palatable for those folks that don't think it's a necessary step. Any thoughts about that? Everybody okay? Everybody all right?
I saw a use of technology around aiding farmers that was kind of interesting. I was working with the wine industry, so obviously they have a little more money to invest in their equipment and things of the such, but they would use different nitrogen sensors in the ground that would also communicate with different like aerial imagery. So they had things like a flyover and take aerial imagery of their crops and then link it with the data of this like nitrogen sensor, and then they could tell what exactly the soil needed. So I was like, that's the next level. So I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about how else technology is being used at some point.
So Melissa, actually, for those of you that are in our cohort 3, we have a whole presentation about eco-technology and agroecology that we will definitely get to in subsequent weeks. Definitely. Anybody else?
We had a friend come and do an aerial view of our garden so that we could map it and do do the crop planning and everything. So that was pretty cool. We had somebody come and take aerial shots and stuff. And so yeah, that's the only thing I've experienced with technology, but I know there's a lot out there, but it was amazing.
So Scott Murray, are you on tonight?
No, Scott's not here.
Okay, so one of the things I was going to say is Scott Murray, who's leading the phase 2 group, he has a wonderful presentation that I hope everybody can get to see of how he uses drones in exactly what you're talking about, Melissa, in terms of mapping. He grows coffee and avocados, and some of it is in very hilly areas in Southern California, right outside of San Diego. And the only way that they can get the information they need without just everybody climbing or driving up hills on rugged terrain is they actually have drones attached. And he did a wonderful presentation and showed the importance of how it can not just help plan out an area, but send other data to you, not only about the soil, but as well about the actually climate and growing conditions as it's happening before your eyes. So that is really important, an important part of it. Anybody else? All right, let's go to the next slide. So you all have discussed this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but part of a crop plan means that you got to plan for change, right? No matter how well we plan, change and challenges are a part of agroecology and farming in general, depending on the year, the location. We talked about this: floods, droughts, fires, pests can all be problematic. Farming and gardening at some times, and all of us has probably experienced this, where it can seem unfair at times. Planning and adapting, however, your existing plan may not only help your farm survive and thrive, but adapting, modifying, and accepting the challenge of your plan may also help you build resiliency, right? And open the door to new farming strategies and techniques. I'd love to hear if anyone with some plans they had to change, or some plans that didn't work out, or how has even some of the challenges or failures helped you in building resiliency on your farm or garden efforts? Anybody?
Pastor Mike, this is Raquel. I can definitely tell you firsthand experience. So I have kind of my garden / food production for me and my family, but we also have chickens, and those raptors will tear up any sort of part of the garden that I took a lot of painstaking time to, plant out, do all of these things. And in one hot second, if you just don't look or think to put netting, or just, you just forget, you think like, oh, I'm done, and walk away. And then next thing you know, they've torn up everything that you've done. So, a lot of it, yes, I could get mad at them. I could say like, well, you owe me some eggs, of which, I'll eventually get, and it's, happy days. But I just need to work a little smarter sometimes, and just also kind of think through some of my ideas, as well as raising things to a point where either they don't have access to, or they may not like something that's planted around them. Or
Right.
Part of my philosophy is, look, I'm going to lose some. It's okay. The chickens will be fine. The whatever survives, it'll be okay. I'm not doing this for production, thank goodness. But honestly, there's lots of different aspects about what your goal is that I think can change your perspective, but also, maybe in reaching out to farmers around you and other people, just say, oh, well, are you having a similar experience? What are you doing about it? Or, are we all having the same experience, and what can we do about it? And I think that then your overall outlook can change, rather than kind of going down a black hole.
Raquel, you really said something that's really important. And one of the things we talk about, right, in agroecology, right, is there's the issue of ancestral knowledge. There's also the concept, right, campesina y campesina, farmer to farmer, right? And so, I think one of the things, even in your crop planning, it is really important to talk to others that are engaged in the field and have had some similar experiences. I know I have a couple of friends and colleagues, that are very experienced urban farmers, and a couple of them have very different strategies. I have one friend of mine, and what she says is, and she's farming, on just a little more than an acre and a half, and she says that she actually, her and her husband actually designate an area, and they do have chickens as well, but they're not really talking about chickens when they say this, but they're talking about other issues of pests that they've had. There's an area that they kind of designate, for critters and pests, and they just know that they're going to lose. I have another buddy of mine that has said to me over the years, nah, I'm not going to even do that. I'm just gonna fight it all the way, without, doing things to just really try to harm nature, harm the environment, but I'm going to try to find strategies. So I think that, you have to look at what works best for you, obviously for you and your family, for the land that you're existing on, the soil and the conditions, and also, your goals, right? Because again, if your goal, is to feed your family, if your goal, is to teach, if your goal is to produce, or be profitable, it may look different depending on where you are in the moment. So thanks, Raquel. I appreciate that. Keep on going, Mike. So then you do have to come to some realities. How much work are you really willing to put in? I think, you know, for the things that I've heard so many of you say, Christina, Melissa, Misty, Raquel, you know, and others, I've heard all y'all start talking about, you know, kind of the work and the time that you put in. There's got to be a willingness to put some time in on the site, as well as in your crop plan, to also study and research what works and what doesn't. It's not a one size fit all approach, and then use that to help build a plan, and then a desire to learn from both success and failures. And all of that can be time consuming. You know, I think there's, you know, that's one thing, even as a hobby, and definitely as a business, you have to acknowledge that farming and gardening is going to be time consuming. And I think that's a beauty of it. I think there's an opportunity to learn from nature, to learn from what it means to exist with the ecology, and the environment. But also you have to be honest, are you willing to put that time in, even in building a plan? Next slide. So zone planning kind of falls in two categories, right? There is temperate and climate zones, and you can find your temperate and climate zone on almanacs. You can find them through the USDA, and there's understanding climate and temperate zones, but there's another part of zone planning that really has to do with permaculture. We'll talk after the break as well. But when we talk about temperate and understanding temperate zone planning, right? Not every plant or flower grows and thrives in every climate. You have to think about that in your crop plan when choosing perennial plants for your garden. It's important to select varieties that can survive and thrive year-round in your area. And this is especially true in regions where extreme weather, winter temperatures are normal. Y'all was talking about the freezing of the ground that was extended. And you know what happens when the ground freezes. Planting zones define generally which plants can survive winter in your area, and zones are typically listed in plant growing guides for reference. Michael was talking to me the other day, and Christina, we know Christina's down in Stockton, right? And I've tried to grow watermelons in Berkeley. If you go maybe, 20 miles, over the hill where Misty is, or even, where Raquel is, definitely if you go, into the valley, much easier to grow. My sister is down in San Jose. She can grow like really nice watermelons down there. But in Berkeley and parts of the East Bay near the shore, I've grown them and they were okay. But, the microclimate here is very different, even than just going 20 miles, 20 miles, north or east or south of here. And so I think you need to think about that even within particular temperate zones. There's still microclimates. Anybody want to kind of talk about that and their experience?
Yeah, I completely agree. I was looking at the zones for plants and not always looking at the location and how much sun or shade they need. So
Okay.
I'm putting them into microclimates that weren't appropriate for them, even though it was the right zone. So it was either like a shade loving plant in a high sun area, even though it was for, zone 8B. So that was something pretty interesting to me. And right now I'm getting ready to move to Ghana. And so I'm looking to see kind of what zones are similar to their location. And that's been pretty neat to research as well. It's actually a lot like some of the zones in California.
Oh, cool. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when you speak of, I should turn on my camera, I guess. When you're speaking of microclimates and the zoning, that I noticed that just a neighbor across the street who has a garden versus mine, just being across the street from each other, the trees that are around can affect the microclimate. She had a beautiful backyard full of strawberries. I mean, it's just like, wow, this is wonderful. And then I'm like struggling. I'm like, just being across the street from each other can make a difference. So
Claudia, you're in Oakland, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then that's when it came down to, okay, I'll share what I can grow, you share what you can grow, and we'll have a good little.
Well, there you go. That's communal living, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, y'all. Look, it's 7 o'clock. We're gonna take a 10-minute break, do what you got to do, and come back, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes, and we'll finish up. Okay, Mike, let's go to the next slide as we're still talking about zone planning. So zone planning in agroecology goes beyond climate, right? So zone planning, when we talk about agroecology, and particularly this kind of comes out of permaculture, but depending on who you talk to, they'll say that the agroecologists were practicing this in many ways ancestrally. But zone planning essentially is a system, right? Where the location of an element in a design is determined by a couple of things, right? How often we need to use the element, and how often we need to service the element. Why do you think that's important? For instance, if you were really planting in zones in your farm or around your homestead, why do you think that's important? How often you need to use the element? How often you need to service the element? Trey, were you trying to say something?
No. Hi.
Okay. Hey.
Sherry, I'm Sydney's mom, and I have something to share about that. I think I'm gonna have to do with perhaps cost containment, because if there's some zones where you know that a crop will grow well and produce, then you'll plant in that. However, you wouldn't want to invest in seeds or plants and plant in a zone that's not going to particularly produce that crop. It might be too cool or too hot. And so that would affect the outcome of the produce or the product that you're growing.
Absolutely. And it's really about energy efficiency, right?
Exactly.
The energy that we expend in a variety of ways, right? So that is exactly right. It's about how do we manage the energy that goes into what we're doing. Thanks, Mom. So, it's a basic logical principle why things that you use more often and things that you have to pay most attention to, you need to place closest to your homestead, your farm in the design. Think about a kitchen garden. If you had a kitchen garden, essentially, the things, the produce that you were going to be using most, most often, herbs and different things, you would really think about building your crop plan around something like that. So the kitchen garden is maybe one zone, and then you have other zones that you build out around the farm or build out around the homestead. Um, I've worked in school gardens before, where they've done zone plantings based on, how they engage their kids, right? So whether, they have, a specific set of boxes for a pizza garden, or a specific set of boxes for a salsa garden, they will plant those kind of as need. One of the big things in a couple of schools I've worked with, because they've incorporated, leafy greens and salads, not just in the garden, but in their school cafeterias. That's a huge thing that's planted close, not just to the cafeteria, but where, kind of closest to where the garden classroom area is. What do you think about zone planting? Is it overkill? Is it an unnecessary step in planting? Do you find it, useful? Can it be, great for managing the energy that goes in to your farm?
I mean, based on some of the accounts, like especially like Misty, those that are really working on a farm and I mean, I keep hearing like how much energy and time and labor it takes to really make it successful. So to me, it sounds like any space or area where you could save a little energy and time seems to make sense to me, especially with this kind of zone planning idea.
Great.
I can offer a reflection too. And I'm sorry I came to the space late. But I find it handy both at home and on the farm where I work to have the plants that need the most attention and ones that need like constant harvesting, right? Like things that are like constantly ripening, things like during the summer, maybe like cucumbers and tomatoes, or like lettuce crops, right? That you pick for leaf lettuce, not for heads, to have those close by, because they grow so rapidly that if you don't have them like constantly in your line of sight, you'll tip into a point where you're wasting crop. That's happened often at the farm where I work, where we'll have like our tomatoes planted like way down the access row, and like after a week someone's down there and all the tomatoes are burst or on their ground and they're eaten by rodents. And the same at home. It's nice to have things that ripen at once farther away. Like I'm thinking like winter squashes, right? They all ripen at once. Corn. We keep that in our backyard because it doesn't get as much attention, but right outside our kitchen door, we have things that need constant care.
Thanks, Trevor.
So I was thinking,
go ahead, Scott.
No, I was just gonna say I was thinking that along the lines of when you're thinking about a garden, a small garden, either in your home or a small space that you have, where you plant certain things where it might get most of the sun, and some things that don't take the sun as best. Similarly.
Absolutely. I think those are all considerations. When you start talking about the sun, and when we're going to get into that in the next piece, because that has far more to do with sector planting. Because zone planting is really more internal. And what you're talking about also is going to be sector planning. We'll get into that as well, but that's a great insight. But there's zone planning and sector planning are related.
Okay.
Pastor Mike, this is Raquel. I think another thing to kind of maybe it kind of overlaps with zone planting is, okay, so one thing is the temperature and the tolerance that these plants have, but another thing completely is because of the weather and how that affects it is the hydrozoning. And so are some plants that, dependent on your weather pattern, able to go and cope with wetter soils, or do they not like that? Do they get wet roots and have root rot? I mean, there's lots of different things that sometimes if you group certain plants together because they're more of the, you know, water loving versus not water loving, you know, is it that your garden or your farm has kind of a slow slope, and then you have some things that you notice do better in a certain region, you know, on that particular time of the year? Those are all things that sometimes, like in 1, 2, 3, you know, year that you kind of see happen, it becomes a little bit more, you become more aware, and then it becomes more of like, oh yeah, you know, so then we kind of do this over here, or we'll plant those things together, and we found that that really makes, you know, a better crop and gives you better results.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Raquel.
I have a question. How or where does cross-pollination come into play when you're selecting what crops to plant and distancing?
Well, again, so I think one of the things, and we'll get into that, we have a whole presentation also about pollinators, right, and pests. And I will say that, for instance, let's take up something obvious, right? If you're talking about cross-pollination and something that people plant like corn, and we know corn is like really controversial for a whole host of reasons, right? However, you know, when you're thinking about something like planting sweet corn, so to say, you know, for the need for cross-pollination, you know, the general thing is, right, you need like rows, you know, really ideally at least 3 rows to go 3 rows deep. And you want to make sure that in doing so, you know, you're deliberate in making that happen. However, I would say that, you know, and again, we'll get into this more with some of you when we start talking about, you know, crop rotation and things like that. You know, some people believe very strongly in things like 3 sisters, not only as a method, you know, of, creating an environment where, the obvious 3 sisters method where you got corns, beans, squash growing together. You know, but some people say that the 3 sisters method does not aid in cross-pollination because you don't really do a 3 sisters method in a row. You know, it's more circular. I've had other people say that 3 sisters is purely myth. Other folks say that they've had great success with it and had great, you know, results with cross-pollination. What you need to really think through is plants like corn, produce, particularly like corn, that you know is in need of that type of cross-pollination. You need to think about how you plan a couple of things around it. Not only, you know, the area or the zone that you're going to plant it in, but also, you know what the needs are of the other plants that you're going to plant in that zone with it or around it. And so I think that it's going to depend on what you have decided in your general crop plan. Is there something, Claudia, in particular, a crop in particular that you're thinking about?
What I was just thinking about in my own garden where I had some kale and I had collard greens, and I was thinking that they might cross pollinate and create something else.
I've never had that experience with kale or collards. I have heard some people share with me they actually with other brachious plants such as broccoli that they have had that experience. I have not personally had that experience, but I've honestly, I grow a lot of collards and a lot of kale close together. I've never had that. And I've never grown broccoli with it. I've grown like broccoli in my yard in a very, very the actually almost the other end, of the garden. So I haven't had that particular experience, but I don't know if anybody else on the call has. But I've never had it.
I've had a little bit of experience with cross pollination, but from what I've heard, if you live in the city, there's not much that you can do, or even in the suburbs, there's not much you can do to avoid it because your neighbor could have a plant that would cross pollinate with yours. So you're just kind of a little bit at risk.
We had planted some melons one year, like watermelons and honeydew and cantaloupe all near each other. And they all didn't really turn out very good. They kind of cross-pollinated with each other. And so the cantaloupe wasn't as sweet. The watermelon was okay. I think it had to do with when we harvested it. But yeah, they all had a different taste. So probably next time I will have an specific area where they're further away from each other.
Very interesting. The other thing I'll tell y'all that I commonly plant together. Claudia was talking about collards and kale. I commonly plant like mustard and turnip greens together. I'm deliberate in it. I don't know. I have had some people tell me, well, these turnip greens taste like the mustard greens. I have had people tell me that. I haven't tasted that difference. That's just me.
Yeah,
but I'm a country boy at heart, so
From what I know, just like from a science perspective, pollination, well, the fruits I'm not sure of, like with the melon case, but with like when we're eating leafy greens and root vegetables, pollination should not affect the flavor of that plant. Like that plant is going to grow up to be what that plant is. And we're concerned about cross-pollination when it comes to seed saving, mostly. Like, because if
that's
we were
a
to
different issue, right? That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
if we were to save seed from those, if we're saving seed from there, then yeah, it is quite possible that your kale and your collards will cross, and sometimes that might be desirable, right? Like it's still delicious. But yeah, from what I know, it shouldn't affect the flavor. And most of the time, you're harvesting your crop before it bolts, like before it flowers, anyways. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it, seed saving. But then, like you said, it's a whole nother subject. But then what made the thought come to mind for me at this moment is because I have a grapefruit tree in a container, and I just got some fruit off of it. It looked strange to me. It was smaller and more orange color than the other half of the tree. It tastes like an orange. And I was like,
you have oranges over there too?
No, I don't.
Interesting.
I don't.
No other citrus?
I do.
Okay.
Myra's lemon. And it was just, I was like, that thought came to mind as far as like, if I were to try to, do a business for profit in the urban environment, I only have so much space, and I want to guarantee that I'm going to be bringing this to market, but then my tree produced something different. Like,
tell them it's a Cara orange. They ain't gonna know the difference. They ain't gonna know the difference.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Tell them it's the soul food ghetto variety of the Cara orange. They'd be all right.
All right.
They'd be all right.
Well, and one thing to comment, it's different, like when you're talking trees versus you're talking annuals versus talking perennials versus biennials, or again, like we're talking about saving seeds. So yeah, something that happened the year before, and those bees went and shared the pollen from a neighboring tree of some sort that happened to be able to cross pollinate. Yeah, you might have one branch, a certain region of that tree that might produce something that tastes slightly different. And so again, that's another reason how we get some possibilities to graft and why we have the compatibility of those things. But, you know, can be a great thing and say like, ooh, look, this is yummy or lovely, or, ooh, maybe I need to like, you know, identify or put a string around that area and see whether or not it continues to produce that undesirable sort of effect. And maybe I need to take that away, who knows? But it's again, like, I think probably the bigger risk for most things is just about if you're trying to get a pure seed of any sort to say, this is the characteristic I really want to go and save. Some plants require a couple of feet. Some plants require, you know, I don't know, 40 or 50 feet. And then you've got the likes of like corn that can be up to a mile. So if you've got an area where you're out in ag country and you've got other fellow people who are all planting sweet corn at the same time, this is a big reason how Monsanto can tell you, you now have our genetic material and you can't save your seed. But that's just kind of, you know, one of those things. They have seed catalogs and stuff, and I'll post, there's one that was sent to me or shared by, I think, the Seed Alliance, and so it will also show about, you know, each different type of plant variety. Like if you're trying to save the seed, how far do you have to stay apart from other plants to make sure you don't have cross pollination, or you might have to cover that plant, you know, during its flowering, which, you know, then inhibits your bee activity and other stuff. It's tricky.
Raquel, that's funny that you brought the Seed Alliance up. I just dropped the link in the chat because that's where I know that resource is too, that pollination resource.
Thank you both of you. Thank you. It's been, your comments have been helpful.
There's one last thing. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but since you mentioned citrus, it's not characteristic of many trees to change their fruit, like just because of pollination, but there are like certain diseases that can change like your fruit production. And one of them that we are really concerned about right now is citrus greening disease. So if you're noticing that this is in one particular part of your tree, you notice that the fruit is like an odd shape, or like you said, like an odd color, it's having a hard time ripening. The advice is to like contact someone. I'm not sure like what the board is, but to contact someone so that they can come test your tree. The disease is a virus that the tree carries. It's given to it through an insect called the Asian citrus psyllid. And it has basically like decimated citrus groves worldwide. Like Florida, that we know is like known for its orange production, has lost like 75% of its orange groves, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, and it is in our area now. It hasn't been for a long time, but I heard recently that it's like kind of in our area. So you have to keep a close eye on it, because if you don't mitigate, if you don't, like, it's sad, but you have to cut the tree down. But it spreads to other citrus nearby quite quickly. Okay, and rant. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
No, this is good. This is good. You know, I was, you know, listening as you all were talking, and Kim walked in, and, you know, she, you know, like Trevor and Raquel, knows a lot more about grafting and things than I do. And she was actually reminding me we lived in a place at one point years and years ago, and there was a black walnut tree that was grafted onto an English walnut tree. And, you know, if you know anything about walnuts, or if you eat walnuts, the thing about black walnuts versus the common or English walnut, black walnuts have a very bold kind of flavor. And English walnuts, you know, are much more mild, you know, in their flavor. And you know, the taste of these walnuts tasted primarily pretty much like a black walnut as opposed to a common walnut. But then every now and then we would get one that didn't have a bold or distinct flavor at all. It was just like a common walnut or English walnut, you know, variety. So that, you know, that is one of the things that happens. But again, that wasn't as much just, you know, cross-pollination in nature. We learned that tree had been grafted, particularly by, you know, the former owner of the house that we were living in at the time. Any other comments before we move? All right, Mike, let's go forward. So Scott was mentioning some things, and as Raquel was talking about, you know, they were describing some things about, you know, weather and winds and, you know, and lighting and angles and, you know, and depending on where you are, salt in the wind and things like that, water flow, as Raquel and others were talking about, unwanted views. Those are about sector planning. You know, we were talking about zone planning is more kind of internal, in terms of, you know, the direct impact from the farm or the homestead, where sector planning has to do far more with the external piece, right? And so we need to really think about the power of sector planning as well, in building out a crop plan. Okay, so there are those things, you know, hot, cold wind, scorching heat, you know how the sun comes down, you know, the issues of water flows and floods, you know, fire danger, with trees. Those are things that need to be accounted for depending on where you are in crop planning. And then, so how do we build out sectors? Scott, does that kind of answer kind of what you were talking about earlier?
Exactly. Thank you.
All good. Next slide, Mike. Continue with that. So one of the things about sector planning, you know, this is about, you know, so in zone planning, we talk about the maximization of internal energies. These are external energies or wild energies, right? You know, the external that come outside of our system, right? And so we need to think strategically in terms of the elements, how we design or manage and take advantage, right, of of the energies that come in, or the external energies. And so we need to think about how do we place plants, trees, structures in appropriate areas, and we need to, how do we block certain incoming energies, the winds that we were talking about, channel incoming energies for our intended use. So this is another thing about how do you work with nature, right? And open the area to allow incoming energy. So, you know, there are ways in which, you know, you can create alleys, you know, to increase lighting and different things like that. What does that look like? In this diagram, if you really look, you know, there's like a farm or a homestead in the corner, and it really looks at the flows, right? You know, of where the sun kind of moves from winter to summer, you know, and back again, you know, and it zones off. You know, these are the areas that could be fire prone. You know, there's a wildlife corridor that may be there, where you think about, I've told folks, Sydney, Raquel, and others who were in our first cohort, I shared a story with them of how years ago on a local farm, he was starting a mini fruit orchard. And I had a grant to get a bunch of fruit trees. And some of them were actually, really nice, some things like pineapple guavas and, and then a bunch of standard things. We got about 40 or 50 trees. And where the farm is a major wildlife corridor, for deer and other things. And, I was working at the Conservation Corps, and I told, the farmer, look, we're going to, come and plant these trees exactly where you want them. But, I know I've been out here enough to know that, the deer are quick to come and attack. And this is a great snack. Why don't you let us, protect them as, these early trees, and we can kind of wrap them with some barbed wire. Oh no, I'll do it myself. And I'm sorry, are you sure? Because while I have this crew here, we can probably do everything in a day. I got 8-10 people working. We can make it happen. No, I'm gonna do it. And I came back literally to the farm maybe 2-3 weeks later, and all but maybe 3 or 4 of those trees were literally eaten down to the nub. I mean, it's like almost nothing left, and I wasn't mad at the deer. I mean, because if I was a deer and I saw a new plum tree that I could chew on and I was hungry, I'd probably do the same thing. But those are things that we need to think about, sector planning. If you're going to do that, how do you protect that area? How do you prevent in that area? And again, this isn't even about harming the wildlife. It's about, planning and knowing, this guy had been on that farm at that time for at least 2 years. So he understood, where that corridor was and the pattern. Any thoughts about that?
I'm just shocked. I'm just like, dang, that sucks.
Yeah.
That would be hard to see. That would be real hard to see.
Yeah, well, I'm not even going to tell you about the $1,000 or more worth of starts that just went bad. That's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother story. So yeah, but again, I mean, those are things that happen. How do you, and again, so there's one thing about having a plan. There's another thing about implementing, and I think we were talking about earlier, the one thing that we can't get around, and again, those of you that are engaged, in this work, either as a business or a program, know that, I love everything that it is and what it represents, but I also understand, you can't sugarcoat certain things. There are some things that you are going to have to put some time and effort into. There's no escaping certain things, just like it is with any other aspect of life. There's some things that you may be able to get around, some things you may be able to cut corners on, but there's other things that's just not the way it is.
I was going to say, sometimes I'm guilty of that because I have so many responsibilities in addition to my ranch. And our permaculture guy that will come, he started out just being a woofer, which is a volunteer that stays with me. And he ended up helping us build a lot. And there's just been problem after problem after problem. And it gets to be exhausting, so you're all in initially. And then there's problem after problem. And it's like, the amount of work, I just did not foresee, there being that much work and that much time away from my family. And so I feel bad because he would be frustrated. He'd give me a list of things to do, and I'd be like, okay, I'll get it done. But then something would be wrong. Like we'd have a leak in the pipe. So we'd end up having to fix that pipe that week instead of doing the thing that he put on the list. You know, we don't have a big crew. It's like me and my husband, you know, and so he'd like 9 times out of 10, I feel like he'd come back over and be like, did you guys do that list? Or what happened to those? You know, we've had plants die, honestly, like just because it was super hot and we didn't have time to water twice a day or whatever. And it's like, it's a responsibility. It's a real challenge, and it requires a lot of you know, just dedication and being and presence. You just got to be really present and on it, and commitment, you know. So I get it. We haven't been as bad as that guy, but, but we have had some duds for sure.
But even the planning, even the planning is a challenge, right? I mean, because I mean, there are times, and again, I'm on here with part of, the CFFJ team, Michael is the most obvious, and and Scott and Traver and Duff, and they all know I'm a notorious procrastinator, and I'm not even gonna lie. I could procrastinate, but I also know that, we have to be real about the fact that there's some stuff that, as tough as it is, we are gonna have to put, time in. And even, and I want to be clear about this too. Even in putting time in, it doesn't mean that everything's going to work out exactly the way we expect. And that's, part of, there's the science of agriculture and the art of farming. And, I think we have to be real about that.
Pastor Mike, I think another item that maybe is, again, like I think I brought it up in the last lecture, was lots of different places, and I'm not sure why, and especially here on the West Coast, it seems like, and maybe, think historically, everybody was a pioneer. You came to stake out your own plot, and you had to kind of like do it yourself to prove that you could do it, and then you were able to keep your land. And I think that we still have somehow that mentality of like, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But, a lot of it too is just, we don't co-op. We don't do a lot of things anymore to like help your neighbor. Just go and reach across the aisle and say, like, hey, can I help you with this? And maybe another time where I need help, or, hey, I need to take a vacation. Is somebody going to be around to, I don't know. There's a lot of things that and granted, like maybe I'm not that far into agriculture or haven't seen like enough, but the feeling that I get from lots of farmers that I have talked to is that they feel isolated, and that, everything in the onus of success is on their shoulders. And it's a very palatable feeling of how I think, in listening and reading a lot of articles about our aging agricultural, group, that there's a reason why people are not wanting to go back into that career choice, about why like all the kids and grandkids are all moving out in a way, and a lot of other variables that kind of go along with that. But it is a very different sort of lifestyle that you choose to have. And though there's a lot of rewards from it, it can be extremely daunting to go and feel like you're constantly on, and that you can never feel like you caught your breath, like our previous, person was mentioning.
True. And the other thing, because I think that there's some harsh realities that, and you just bring that up, this is real. I think one of the other things we need to be real about too is that we're unfortunately, and whether you call this, a result of urbanization, or, our emphasis, on individuality, but we're often not socialized anymore, to really be, and this is kind of a frustrating thing for me because I work in this area. People always talk about being in community and being engaged, but we're really not socialized, right? Often to be in real community with people. We have an overlay, of what community, really means and what community is. And, we've created online communities, we've created, social media communities. Arnold Perkins, that Scott knows well, who used to be the longtime director of public health for Alameda County, Arnold, would say, if you really want to, really hear me and talk to me, okay, you may not be able to meet in my office. And this is way, way before COVID. He's like, but if it's just some basic stuff, okay, send me an email. But if it's something you really need to talk to me about, he's like, pick up the phone and call me and have a conversation with me. And a lot of us don't like having conversations with folks. The irony of COVID is because, it's forced us, because we can't be, together. And there's some things now we got to deal with that go beyond, a text or hitting somebody on Instagram, that we've got to find other mediums, whether it's Zoom, Google Meet, or whatever, where we really have to have some extended conversations. And I know it wears people down, but a lot of times, if you think about even pre-COVID, think about people that would send like really, really long texts to you. You could have probably picked up the phone and called them and been off the phone with them in 5 minutes or less. But there's something about us not really wanting to talk to each other a lot of times, let alone aid each other, and we don't want to talk about it. And I don't know if that is, part of, the challenges, if they're psychosomatic. I don't know if it's just that we're really busy, maybe there's some issues relationally we have with folks. But I do think that it impacts not just, the agricultural community. I think it impacts, just how we engage. And then, damn, man, I hate to really say this, and I should have said this before. I don't know if anybody, knows anyone who was impacted by what we saw in San Jose today, but they were talking to one neighbor, where this guy had lived, and they were asking, well, did you know him? And there was one neighbor who was like, no, I didn't know him. I saw him a few times, but I never really knew him. And another neighbor was like, well, I just thought he was weird, but I didn't really, really think anything of it, and blah, blah, blah. And you think about, it's scary, but a lot of us don't really know our neighbors. And some of us aren't really interested, again, before we even get, to the agricultural community, some folks don't want to know their neighbors at all. And maybe sometimes it's a good reason. Other times, maybe it's just been the way we've been socialized. Brother Robert, help me out. I know you drive around to a lot of neighborhoods. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it can be. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, it can be tough, and like I say, and I guess it's all about the approach. If you see someone, and you approach them, they seem like they're, want to be off distance, you kind of just shy away from them. And like and like I say, for you to have community, you got to have some type of unity for us to I don't know. It's a touchy situation. That's why I like, not to throw it out there, but that's why I like my ministry name, Love Thy Neighbor Ministry.
Okay.
So I'm relating to any and everybody the best I can. If they receive it, fine. If they don't, I'm still gonna not treat you no different.
And I know you deal with a population. Obviously, you deal with a lot of a population where you where you deliver the food to, it ranges from the unhoused community. It ranges, from some folks that have had some real struggles, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. Other people that just may not like you in the moment, just for who you are, whatever. But you continue to really move towards community, and maybe that's part of just kind of your mission and the spirit that you have in you. But in general, just I know you, like me, you go back to a time where people did know their neighbors.
Right.
People did know their neighbors.
Well, where I grew up at, we invented the neighborhood watch. That's how close-knit neighbors were.
Okay.
If I got in trouble at school, I done
Folks
got
knew what's up.
I done got like 3 or 4 whoopings before I even got home. So I got the real one. And that's out the picture now. And and I was just reflecting back one day. I remember on 24th and MLK, we was out there serving, and I gave a guy a bag lunch and juice and whatnot. And he just threw the juice. I almost lost it. I'm like, dude, and my wife had to calm me down. She said, he might not have had his meds then. And we went back the next week.
Folks like that.
Right. And we came into it we met him next week. He had a whole different attitude.
Right.
And my wife said, see, that's why, because if you'd just went East Oakland on him, it'd have been a whole different ball game.
It'd
Then
have
I'd
been a
have been
different
the
ball
bad
game.
guy.
That's right. That's right. Anybody else?
I think that's the beauty of agriculture and like planting stuff. Before we moved to our property, I would always try to be outside because all the neighbors, they stay in the house. People don't need each other anymore. You need to be needed in order for that connection. I feel like that to happen, and that humility and the bonds to kind of form, and people we do need each other. We just don't say it, or we don't think we do. But ever since I got this property, now we've had service Saturdays and people will come over and help. And all of a sudden it's just like been blossoming, and we've been now like, we pay it forward. So like people that come over here will go then work on their garden. So we've been doing this kind of pay it forward kind of thing where we're creating this community of volunteers. And it's been really amazing to see. Whereas, I thought I had community before, maybe at church, but you just go on Sundays and say, hey, hi, and that was it. But like, these are people that even just people, it's just interesting. The agricultural community the bonds that I've formed are stronger, I feel like, than even my church friends, because the people I have that have stayed at my house the past couple times when we've gone out of town have been woofers, or people that come and volunteer on my property on Saturday. They actually stay in my house. Like, I trust these people more than I trust anybody else. It's just crazy. So it's just so beautiful, and it's just a unique thing. And I agree with you that people just don't talk, they don't communicate, and it's sad, but that's why this is, I feel like, a calling. I feel like we're being called to do this, and for more reasons than one, and just spread that community and that light and be able to connect with one another.
That's so powerful. Go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. But yeah, that's something, the volunteer piece that I noticed almost across the board, and anything, because I volunteered at my church's food pantry, and that's where I felt a bigger community relationship. So anything involving mutual aid truly is like it ties you to people, and all of a sudden you realize that you're on the same vibration, the same wavelength. So even if you don't have the same general beliefs, you still like care for people, and you want to show that community care. So yeah, I agree.
Thank you. I mean, let me say this, because I have a little interesting perspective in this, that obviously I pastor a church, but I didn't start a garden-based program. There's been a feeding program and pantry at the church for years. But let me talk to you about the people that eat and the people that we have to work with. For me, it's interesting because, and Scott, who's part of our team, you know, we grew up with a lot of the folks that eat in the soup kitchen. A couple of them literally still, you know, still live, like 2 or 3 of them still live literally right around the corner from me. And I'm gonna tell you the truth, and Scott has been here and Michael's been at my house where they have literally knocked on my door at night or in the afternoon. I need something to eat, you know, or do you have $5? Help me get something to eat. And some of these brothers, have been through some serious trauma in their life. And, you know, some of them, Michael has worked with some of them in the garden program, you know, and what we saw for some of them is that they had, you know, at least as much hands-on skill as we did. And so the one thing about building community, and I think this is the important thing I want us to think about, is what we share with people, but it's also what people share back with us and what they teach us. I have probably learned more from some of the unhoused community. I've learned more from some of the kids that we work with in the community than I think that we've ever given to them. We got young people who are transitional, homeless, you know, you go down the list. And the one thing that we see is that no man, no woman is an island unto themselves. And there is a point at which we do need each other in terms of building our communities and creating the kind of community that we want to be able to live in. And when we center that around farming and agriculture, we had our lecture a couple of weeks ago about food systems. And we know if there is going to be any change in our food system, it is not going to come from outside of communities. It's not going to be top down. It's got to be ground up, and it has to happen within. Just something to think about. I got a couple of more slides, and I'm gonna get out your way. I just need 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mike. So this is what I just really want to get to. Just talk to you about 4 basic steps in helping you create a crop plan. You know, you want to be, we've talked about this stuff, you know, you want to list when your crops are going to be available, forecast when your crops can be available throughout the season, creating that spreadsheet with a column for every week of the season. We've kind of talked about that, right? And then, you know, next below each week, list the vegetables available at that time of the year. Curate and understand what your weekly offerings are going to be, your produce or your shares if you're doing something like a CSA box, right? Keep going, Mike. Create that planning schedule. We've been talking about that all night. And then assign locations, another thing we've been talking about for your plans. Those 4 steps are critical. Next, Mike. And then you need to think about, because nobody, you know, they're traditional and non-traditional, and there's probably far more non-traditional folks, you know, on this call, in this class, in this space, that are thinking about how you're building out what you're going to do. So yeah, so those of you that may be doing things for profit, you know, you do need to think about those direct and continuous harvests, and your crop plan needs to be built around that. But maybe you're trying to participate or create a CSA, community supported agriculture, or some kind of market farm stand. That planning may look a little different. It's going to look very different in some ways. We have a AFFP student who's really interested in rooftop gardening. Well, a rooftop gardening, again, is going to look very different. And he's also interested particularly in aquaponics as well as aeroponics, and vertical farming. And so those types of prop plans are going to be kind of dictated not only by the market, but the needs in the space of where you are. And they're going to be non-traditional plans that are not going to look like you're just on a conventional gardener farm. Next slide. And so finally, just bringing it all together. Don't let crop planning intimidate or frustrate you, though it can be frustrating. You don't have to be a technological whiz kid, using basic spreadsheets or using something even like a whiteboard or a chalkboard to help you kind of map out and draw out your plan can help you. Start by listing what you want to grow and the information you need to execute it, in an ideal growing season. What does your ideal growing season look like? Make your plan a document that can be interpreted by anyone, not just by you. Keep it simple. Keep the plan simple. And then you can build on it in future seasons or future years, and then have a short-term goal, of a completed seed order in a timely manner. And then you want to be able to calculate the amount of seeds and starts that you're going to need, looking through, catalogs, seed libraries, online resources. Do you need things for organic certification? How do you keep track of your financial records? Do cost analysis if you're into for-profit pieces. Those things are going to be important things in building a crop plan. But the bottom line is you got to get started somewhere. And I think I would encourage you all to do it. That's kind of all I have. Any feedback that you want to give Michael and I to help us improve? Did we waste your time? I have thick skin, so if this was a waste, please tell us and we will try to improve.
Well, like I say, good
I
stuff.
have a question.
Go ahead.
Just curious to know if anyone in this group has a crop plan like spreadsheet to show as a sample.
I did see some templates online real briefly. I don't know if you already have curated or pulled some out, Mike. Something I could look at.
I do, and so
Okay.
I'll put them in the classroom so y'all can see them. There's a couple that I have that I'll put and I'll have Mike put in Google Classrooms.
Okay, thank you.
I have one too.
Simpler is better. Just trust me when I say that.
Well, and the master gardeners also kind of give you an annual sort of month by month, or, there's kind of even a more finite breakdown if you want. And let me find the link and I'll forward that on in the classroom. But they try to also kind of break it down so people have an idea of what types of crops you have available in each month to kind of decide, well, do I want to grow these or maybe another variety of this? And then you can kind of start thinking about those like grouped together, and some that are even in a kind of landscape form that it kind of crosses over each month. So kind of how long the season will be for each crop, and it shows you the overlap. And that's a good visual too, to kind of, think about, okay, it's more of a loop system rather than, from January through December. It's like, no, and then you're going to start over again.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, questions? All right, y'all, we'll get information out to you, and thank you for being on. And those of you that are in our cohort 1, we'll see you next week. And our cohort 3, we'll see you next week in our cohort 1 phase 2 people. We're really glad to see you all. Joyce, I didn't hear from you, but it's always good to see you on. So I just wanted to let you know I saw you on there. So y'all have a great night. Really appreciate you all, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Mike. Great to see you too.
Y'all take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Night.
Thank you. Thank you.